Good morning, everyone. My name is Esther Manheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 18th, 2024 Agenda Briefing Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website, or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You may also listen to the meeting on your phone, calling 855-925-2801. That's 855-925-2801, meeting code 6075. As this is an agenda briefing, we will not take public comment. Council and staff, please unmute yourselves and say a quick hello when I call your name. Vice Mayor Sandra Kilgore.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody.
And turning to staff, City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Morning.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good morning.
City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Good morning, everyone.
And I'm now going to turn it over to our City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, good morning. I want to also welcome you to our agenda briefing work session. And as you all know, we usually cover a number of items, which will include our upcoming City Council agenda for April the 23rd meeting, Council Committee meetings, and we only have one, which is the Environment and Safety Committee. We review the 8-week agenda, and we have an overview of other issues and updates. And I must admit, I did sneak item on the other issues and updates portion of the agenda regarding an update on the budget process. This was not on your agenda when you received it earlier this week. It'll be a quick review, so I think we can cover that in short order. But as you know, there is a lot of items on our work session agenda, our regular meeting agenda. So I will turn it over to Assistant City Manager Ben Woody, who is going to take that first item to review our agenda for the April 23rd meeting. Ben.
Thank you. And again, good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm going to jump right in. Want to note that your upcoming council meeting on April 23rd will start at 4 p.m. and it will be at the Harris Cherokee Center. So again, just for council and anybody wishing to attend, please note the early start time and the location change for that meeting. So looking at your agenda, we have two proclamations. Actually, we have three proclamations, excuse me. One is April 2024 is Less Plastic Asheville Month. And the week of May 12th through 18th is National Police Week. And finally, May 15th is Peace Officers Memorial Day. So we'll have all those proclamations at our meeting. Moving to the consent agenda, I'm going to cover a few items. I'm going to do a couple items as a group. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand and stop me and ask. And if I don't cover something you want to discuss, please let us know. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to start with item D. Item D is an ordinance that authorizes the demolition of a single-family dwelling at 158 South French Broad. I want to highlight this item because this is not something that council considers very often. As a matter of fact, in my 7 years here, this is the first demolition we've actually moved forward with. In this case, this particular structure has deteriorated to a condition that's not only unsafe for human habitation, but it also poses a risk to some of our life safety first responders that have had to go to that location at times to address concerns. The staff spent more than a year working on this property with the responsible party to try to have them address these structural issues. To date, the owner has not been responsive, so we're at a point now where we need to move forward with the demolition of the structure. And to do that in North Carolina, it requires that council approve a demolition ordinance so that we can move forward. If that's done, the demolition will be funded through the DSC operating budget, after which a tax lien is placed on the property to eventually recoup those funds used for the demolition. Item F.
And I had a question on that.
Yeah.
I've been in some conversations with community members and in emails, but just, am I remembering correctly that there's been a lot of activity on this site and lots of conversation for a long time, and that our public safety folks have been responding to it. So could you just like elaborate for the purpose of like, because this is pretty unusual that we would go to this length, but it's also pretty unusual the amount of community disruption it's been having is kind of the way that I've been understanding it, but curious to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, it's typically in Asheville, either properties are addressed or they tend to turn over in our real estate market. So we don't get to this point a lot, but I'll note. So for example, I know, and APD's on the call, they could probably elaborate, but we've had at least one serious assault that's occurred on this property. Which of course requires police to respond. We've had people that have entered the building to either start fires for warmth or just occupy the building. Again, having individuals in this structure is not only dangerous for those individuals, but also dangerous when our first responders have to enter the structure to address any concerns. So I think we've had a number of calls for service here on this property related to assaults and squatting and things like that. So again, it's just become a real hazard to not only the individuals that are entering the property, but the first responders and the community members that are, in close proximity or having to respond to this property.
And we've tried to work with the property owner extensively and not really, it has resulted at this point because that progress has been made on their part.
Correct. We have, to some extent, probably frustrated some of the community because we've tried very hard to work with the property owner to address these concerns. Because of course, we obviously don't want to demolish any structure in Asheville, and that's not something that we're in the business of, nor want to do or fund. So we've made every effort. We've exhausted every effort possible to try to have the property owner address this.
And Ben, didn't we get some requests from the neighborhood? Really, it wasn't just that we had some public safety issues. We actually got requests from the neighborhood to demolish this house, right?
Absolutely. They email Mark Matheny probably once a month. So they've been very active around their concerns.
And just to
I think the neighborhood's going to have a party when this house gets demoed.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reiterate that this structure just does not meet any minimum building codes. That is the impetus. And then in addition to not meeting minimum building standards, we're having all of these other public safety issues with that structure as well.
And the house has been in this condition in this state for decades. Like my childhood home is the home to the right, to the left, and it's been abandoned for as long as I can remember. So it should be no more discussion about it. It's a done deal.
Well, I guess for me, I just didn't realize that they knew who the owner was. I thought it was more or less like an estate, situation where you couldn't really get. I didn't realize you actually had contact with the person, because it's been like that, like Shanika said, for just years and years. So it's amazing that it took us this long to resolve this issue.
I'm not sure the person that owned the referenced owner, they may not even known they were owner. So again, you're right, Councilwoman Kilgore. I think it took a lot of effort to track down really who the heir was for this property. So that was not easy, and we have to do that in order to move forward with this type of action. So that was very challenging.
Right.
Okay. Again, I just wanted to highlight that because that's not an action we typically take in Asheville. Next, I'm going to highlight items F through J. So that's a number of items, but I'm going to give a summary of those. And again, we can answer any questions on specifics if you have those. So F and J are a series of authorizations for the Asheville Police Department that allow them to apply for grants, to accept grant awards, and to renew an existing contract. Importantly, each of these items was reviewed at the March Environment and Safety Council Committee, and that committee did recommend unanimous approval to full council. Councilwoman Roney.
Yeah, I haven't seen this popping up at the committee level yet, but I am still curious because the Edward Byrne Justice Grant allows this type of funding to be applied for things like supporting survivors of crime and crime prevention. I've been seeing other communities that are looking at how to move this into working with community health workers to prevent gun violence and intimate partner violence. So I understand that we have a committee recommendation, but we always are looking for revenue sources for that kind of work in our community. And I guess I would be interested in how that kind of conversation could happen moving forward in the future. Instead of just funding our current operations, is making sure that we're sending the right person with the right tools and training, because we have serious gun violence issues and intimate partner violence issues in our community. And this is a tool that can be used to fund that.
I'll just harken back to the committee meeting. Like, I fully agree with you that we need those type of things. I just don't necessarily see it as either or. To me, it's kind of, this is the needs. Several of these are established longstanding needs. And so I think that I'd always love to collaborate in finding the new resources to do the type of things that I want and you want. But don't think of it as just because, like, I don't see it as either or.
Okay, I'm going to continue to move through the consent. Next, I'm going to do another kind of grouping of items. Items K through O and item T, I want to highlight those. They are a reflection of the good work happening in our DCREF department. So that's Chris Curl's Regional Entertainment Facilities Department. And these items include contract and budget amendments that reflect, always good news, better than expected sales and revenues at the Harris Cherokee Center, as well as a continuation of some partnerships and capital improvements that are occurring at the Nature Center and the Municipal Golf Course. So again, just want to recognize some of the improvements and positive news from those facilities. Item Q is an amendment up to $64,000, including contingency, to the Nasty Branch Greenway design contract. And what this does is address some requests, an amendment to the design contract. So, and it's addressing some of the revisions that are necessary for stormwater systems associated with that Greenway project. I just want to note that the revisions and the change order are a result of some of the delays that have occurred with the project. But I also want to note that once we get through these revisions, we are expecting this project will be ready to bid for construction in late summer of this year. So again, we're just continuing to move forward the Nasty Branch Greenway as best we can and looking forward to getting that construction underway. Item R is related to a need identified in the facilities master plan. And I just want to note this so folks understand. This is a lease agreement that will move our fire department administrative functions over to the Jackson building. And the reason we're doing that is to allow for some of the structural repairs associated at the Muni building that, again, we discussed as part of the facilities master plan work. Doesn't necessarily, it's just the admin section of the fire division that's moving over there to the Jackson building. Item S, or excuse me, go ahead, Councilwoman Ullman.
Ben, what time frame would that lease be for?
So the lease, oh, go ahead, Rachel, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. It's a 5-year lease.
So this is, as we anticipate really making big steps there, we're ready to start physically moving now to get paving. I love progress. That's great news. And it's great that we found something so close that works. And thanks to the Jackson building for collaborating with us.
Yeah, really, it's going to allow the structural repairs to happen to one of the bays. There's an elevator or supported bay in the community building that a fire truck needs to sit on. So it's going to give us the ability to make some of those important repairs. Item S, and this is the last item I'm going to cover on the consent. S is a change order to the demolition contract for the removal of the Vance Monument. Of course, as council knows, that work was paused in June of 2021 in compliance with the North Carolina Court of Appeals decision. However, following the recent favorable ruling of the North Carolina Supreme Court, we're now able to continue moving forward that demolition contract. So the contractor will have to remobilize. There's additional storage fees we have to address. And of course, with time that has passed, there's adjustments to rental and labor costs. So all that adds up to a not to exceed change order in the amount of $109,402. And that will allow us to follow through with and complete the demolition of the Vance Monument. And we anticipate the work will be completed by the end of July of this year. Councilwoman Roney.
When we looked at these items last time, my notes show that we had contracted with the MWBE local employer around landscaping. Are we still maintaining that same contract? Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions on consent or any questions or any items we need to cover?
Ben, if I could, I want to go back to the APD grants and respond to the question that Ms. Ronnie asked. I've asked Chief Lamb to chime in on some things that they are doing, which I'd like for him to share.
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, we are currently looking at a grant that is titled the Community-Based Violence Interruption and Prevention Initiative Site-Based Program. And that's from the Office of Justice Programs. Earlier this month, I received the notice in the grant application from Fred Hudson with the Department of Justice. And so we're currently looking at how we can use that grant, how we could possibly partner with some of our violence interruption groups within the community to also jointly do some type of grant application together. So we're in the beginning stages of that, and hopefully we'll be able to be awarded that grant.
Is that the first time we would have applied for this grant program?
Yes, with the city of Asheville, yes. I know Spark and some of the violence prevention groups that work through Spark are already part of an existing grant from that same office. So they will do a reapplication for the grant that they have that's in partnership with Buncombe County. So we're looking at other possibilities as well.
Does that mean then we're in competition because we're applying for the same pool of funds, or how are we working to make sure that we don't receive cumulatively less funds for services?
No, it would be in addition to, so it wouldn't be in competition with, because there's a category 1 and a category 2. The category 2 allows the governmental entity to do a grant on their own. The category 1 allows us to partner with an outreach group or a violence interruption group and do the work with them.
So I know that we're getting in the weeds on the consent agenda and we have such a busy agenda for today, but I had requested, along with Vice Mayor Kilgore, a meeting with the police chief and the fire chief, since we've got some new folks in leadership. I would love to have that conversation and know more about programs like this that are new, so we can get into the weeds, not necessarily at this meeting. But thank you for filling us in.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Chief. Dave?
Thank you. So moving on, we have 2 items under new business. Item A is the yearly allocation from the Housing Trust Fund, which is one of the city's primary tools to support affordable housing or the development of affordable housing. This year, the total proposed allocation is just over $4.6 million across 5 eligible projects that would produce 197 affordable units. The HCD Council Committee actually considered this earlier this week, and they recommended unanimous approval of the proposed Housing Trust Fund allocations. Councilwoman Turner.
Sure. Just a real quick FYI for council, because HCD was more in the weeds on this. Back when we did the bonds and we set aside the $1 million for down payment assistance, and it ended up not being able to align a partner that could administrate it, we had a conversation among council about shared appreciation models. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there is an application that is recommended by HCD that does have a shared appreciation model in it, and it does have the return of that appreciation going to the administrator, not the homeowner. Just pointing it out for transparency, because I know it was a discussion we had in the past. So if you have any concerns, this would be the time.
Okay, hearing none, I'll move on to item B. Item B is a resolution approving recommendations for the allocation of strategic partnership grants for FY24. As a reminder, the scope of the strategic partnership grant program is to focus on closing the opportunity gap for low to moderate income school-aged youth. Again, earlier this week, the Equity and Engagement Council Committee unanimously recommended moving forward the evaluation panel's funding recommendation to full council. If there are no questions on new business, we do not have any presentations and reports this meeting. However, we do have a number of public hearings. I'm going to start on public hearings with items A and B, and I'm going to cover those together. These, and council's aware of these, are resident submitted zoning text amendments that propose changes to the UDO's cottage development standards and the flag lot standards. These public hearings were originally scheduled on October 24th. They were then continued to January 23rd, and then continued again to April 23rd. And the series of continuances was to allow time for the completion of the missing middle housing study, which has been completed. In response to the missing middle housing study recommendations, staff has developed an alternative amendment that includes really a suite of backyard housing policies. That alternative was presented to Planning and Zoning Commission at their April meeting. That body continued that, so staff with their alternative proposal will be back in front of Planning and Zoning in May. If those staff initiated, if provided Planning and Zoning makes a recommendation in May, those staff initiated amendments will come forward to council at a future date. So that really leaves us with these two requests from the resident submitted petition. And at this time, because of the progress of really the staff proposal, the alternative, staff is recommending denial of the resident submitted text amendments, as they do not fully align with the recommendations of the missing middle study, and based on some of the concerns the technical review committee had, particularly with the flag lot standards. I do want to note, however, that the resident submitted text amendments that are before you in April, they did go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that was that would have been before October, actually. And Planning and Zoning did recommend approval of the resident submitted text amendments by a 3-to-1 vote. Any questions on those two items?
Just one comment, Ben. I mean, I guess I thought we delayed this application to time it with the city's ability to have their documents done, but we're just not ready. And then the applicant doesn't want to delay.
That's correct. I think the staff tried in good faith to, bring forward an alternate amendment based on the missing middle recommendations, but it got paused at Planning and Zoning. That's not a bad thing. That gives us more time to work through some of the challenges.
When I was watching the Planning and Zoning, it was about not having an overlay ready, and that's the big thing, right? Okay.
Correct. I think the staff's trying to address some of the, some of the geographic concerns with implementation of this type of policy, and trying to be thoughtful about that. And again, the applicant expressed his desire to go ahead and move his proposals forward for council consideration.
And so we're literally voting up or down their request. We couldn't necessarily say we want to support it, but without some particular neighborhoods, because we don't have that overlay ready.
Yeah, I mean, it's without the applicant has added a provision that gives, that excludes some areas, some geographies of the city. But it's not necessarily neighborhood specific, so to speak. I think the applicant's trying to address some of the concerns, but it's just without the overlays up there's, it's very challenging to really parse this out geographically and reflect some of the recommendations of the missing middle study that relate to vulnerable or neighborhoods that are vulnerable to displacement and gentrification.
Yeah, the way that.
Hey, Maggie, can I jump in front of you? Wait, can I, just on a process question? I was trying to remember if staff, because it got delayed in P&Z, if staff would not be available, it could not come, staff's recommended iteration, could not come to council on the 23rd, just the timing, or was it because we already had a really big agenda on the 23rd and it was ready?
It's because of the timing. We're not able to bring it forward to council because we don't have that recommendation.
Yeah, okay. The way that I'm seeing this come through is like pursuing it now means that we would like it having it on our agenda now means that it doesn't account for us trying to have some type of overlay conversation about our legacy neighborhoods. And I feel like a lot of us expressed concern about that at the last council meeting. So the risk of pursuing it now is that we don't do that, but we just spend a lot of time working together as a community saying we want to make sure that any of these zoning changes takes into account those legacy neighborhoods. And then I want to maybe toss some kudos towards staff that I don't even think this is about like staff isn't ready. This is about like, if we passed an overlay now, we would have talked about it with 0 neighbors. Like that doesn't work, right? Like it's not that staff isn't hustling and working really hard. It's that if we're going to have conversations around overlay, that needs to be in community with community. And that is important, worthwhile work that isn't going to turn before the 23rd. And so that to me is kind of where I really like the concepts of the flag lots in the cottage court. I think having those style forms will be really good for community. But rushing that would, I think, kind of undermine the conversation we're trying to have, that we want to set up a zoning pattern that really accounts for displacement risk. So like rushing it for that. I know we have a housing shortage, but anyway.
And I like to chime in and say it's actually just not the legacy neighborhoods. When you look at the missing middle displacement study, it also included Oakley. And I'm wondering, well, I'll just be very transparent. In this iteration, before we've had a chance to do the overlay district, I won't be able to support this when after the overlay, I very likely would be able to support this. So my question is, if it does not move forward, or if it goes down on Tuesday, is there anything preventing staff from coming back with the same notion once you come back to us after the overlay? Then?
Yes, I don't, and I'll, Brad, if you can jump in if you need to, but I don't think, you know, whatever the disposition is of the resident tax amendments on Tuesday, I don't think that impacts what the staff is working towards bringing to council. And I just want to know, you know, I don't know if it'll be an overlay. There may be other tools. I think part of what's happening at planning and zoning is the staff and that body are just trying to work through what are the options, what are the tools that council can consider to try to number one, implement the missing middle study recommendations successfully, but also try to minimize any unintended outcomes on other portions of the city. So I don't know what it looks like when it gets to council, but I think what you're saying is what is happening between staff and planning and zoning right now. And I don't think these resident amendments will impact the staff proposal as it moves forward.
And just for clarity, then, did you give the staff recommendation for?
I did. Yeah, staff is recommending denial of these 2 resident submitted text amendments.
And I think it is the tool. We understand the goal. in terms of addressing housing supply, addressing underutilization of land, but there are some concerns that we have about neighborhood compatibility and land use consistency, and again, engaging others for input on the process, and we will come back with staff recommendations that we think will address and respond to the issues and concerns that have been expressed by legacy neighborhoods and others, and try to accomplish the goal of the missing middle study by hopefully mitigating, from our perspective, land use inconsistencies and other economic impacts. And Brad, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add.
I think everyone's covered it. Just procedurally, I think the short answer is that the only impact potentially would be a positive vote on these two items, because that might create a conflict with some of what is probably going to be proposed by staff. But if it was a vote not to adopt these particular proposals, I think you are likely then to see what staff is going to propose once they finish the review process with planning and zoning, which would give you an updated alternative to the citizen proposals.
It makes me wonder if the applicant is watching and seeing our concern over this. It almost sounds like they should delay, but on the other hand, it's like this process that we're talking about and taking on is going to be pretty lengthy, wouldn't we think? No? You think do we have any idea? 1 month, 6 months?
Idea of when it would, yeah. What's the estimate, Ben?
Ben, do we have anyone from planning on?
No, but I think, I don't think it's, so a lot of it depends on the Planning and Zoning Commission, providing that recommendation. But I know that if they are able to get a recommendation at the May Planning and Zoning, this could literally be the City Council at one of your May meetings.
Oh, well, then I really hope that the applicant is watching and hearing our concern. I'd almost hate for it to be turned down when it could just be juggled a little, aligned with the other process, and to us in a month. But I know delays are hard, and it's a long waiting process for them. So I understand if they push forward, but perhaps they're watching.
I mean,
we did a lot to communicate. Ben did a lot of outreach as well as from the staff.
But I think I sense support from council. I don't want to speak for anyone, obviously, but I sense support, but with this district or overlay or other tool layered in. So, maybe they're listening and can realize that and potentially delay.
And just to note, last thing I guess I'll say is there are elements of the resident petition that are very similar to what the staff is proposing. So there's definitely elements where I think there is, that both parties are in sync. There's just nuance and details where they kind of diverge a little bit. So I don't want to give the impression that a lot of what's in the resident petition is reflected in the staff amendment. So there is some synergy between the two requests. It's just, as always, it's kind of working through the details that can be challenging. Okay, I'm going to continue moving. Item C is a conditional zoning at 767 New Hall Creek Road. We have just learned this morning that item will be continued to the June 11th council meeting. So, and that was requested by the applicant to provide more time to make some changes to their development plan based on the input they've received to this point. So we'll cover that in more detail prior to the June 11th meeting. And your last public hearing scheduled for your next meeting. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to understand this one. You're saying item C is getting continued?
That is correct. Item C, the Hall Creek conditional zoning, is the applicant has requested a continuance to June 11th.
So we're having a meeting in a new location at a different time. Are we changing back to any of our other logistics?
Exactly.
It's kind of confusing for
I think we should stick with the current logistics and just because of
I
how
don't
much
think we have a
communication we've
choice.
done.
Yeah, if I could
Brad will
chime in
tell
on
us how we
this.
don't have a choice.
Yeah, let me throw a wet blanket on that. Excellent idea, and it makes all the sense practically in the world. However,
I don't think that we should. I just think we just noticed a 4:00 meeting at a new location. I think we should keep it.
and that's really the reason, is that we have already provided notice, not just for the meeting in and of itself, but we've provided special notice regarding the last item on your public hearings agenda, which is the bid. Individual notices were sent out to every property owner within the geographical location of the bid, stating that time and that location. And that has to be done on a very particular time schedule. So we don't even have the ability to alter that location or the time, even though we've had some changes to the agenda at this point.
This is kind of the inherent problem with this one, because we know we need to do this item over at Harris, but we got to notice it, well in advance. And then if it gets continued, we're stuck with this arrangement. So I don't really know exactly how to address that problem. I did talk to Chris Pelly this morning with Hawk Creek. They're going to get the word out as fast as they can to all their folks and let them know that this is going to be moved. I'm sure they're watching. I told them Maggie Burleson is the one who gets to decide when this gets put back on the agenda, because I guess May's already kind of jam-packed. So June it is.
Yeah, I agree that it would be great to not have super packed agendas. So I thought we were having I know we couldn't have a quorum meeting, but I thought there was a meeting last Thursday with some council members in the neighborhood and the developer, and they were working on some negotiations. Like, are we going to wait until the meeting to hear about that? Like, how are we going to get information on?
No, we can. Yeah, we can talk about that now. And of course, anyone who was in that meeting, they had representatives of the developer, and the neighborhood had several representatives there, 5. And they talked through, the neighborhood had already put out, and I think you all have seen, sort of 4 major points that they wanted addressed. And it was really more of a conversation between the developer and the neighborhood, going through each of those points, and as a result, and some good problem solving from Councilwoman Turner, the developer's gone back to the drawing board to try to revise the site plan to accommodate some of the requests of the neighborhood. We have not seen those revisions. I do think that that's actually why they're requesting this continuance. They need more time now to revise that site plan and work through a lot of the issues, and it's just not going to be able to come together in time for the meeting on Tuesday. The neighborhood also wants a chance to review that revised site plan when it's ready and have some time. That they've actually asked if they can sit down again with the developer after that work is done and kind of talk through it some more after that. So I told them I'm glad to sit down and facilitate another meeting before the June meeting. Of course, you all are welcome to attend short of a quorum or on your own, of course. So we don't have anything scheduled for that, just sort of a rough idea of what the game plan is.
Just
Sage,
real quick.
add
I'll just share real quick. I mean, I feel hopeful about this, in that, from the beginning, the Hawk Creek residents have not really been saying, don't do this project. They just have said, maybe a smaller scale or these little changes. And I'm really thankful when the community members come together in a more productive conversation. So I was able to attend a meeting with the applicant and the community members, and it was really productive, I thought, and well-intentioned. So it does sound like there are some options coming together and some due diligence around them, and then more community meetings. But I wanted to share just some appreciation for the community members that are just working so proactively on this. We don't always see that. And I think it goes a long way towards the applicant being able to work with that and come up with some solutions so that we can get more housing in a better way for that area. But happy to attend more community meetings if needed. And I think I'm talking with some of them later today as well. Maybe we'll get this one to a good place.
Another question I had is, there's rumors that there's going to be a new road instead of a bridge or something like that. Like, if there's going to be a potentially new road in a community, does that take more community input because it's a new kind of public infrastructure? And if so, is June enough time?
I did hear that was one of the things they were looking at, the bridge versus another entryway, because of the amount of savings that would then allow them to reduce the number of homes or units overall and protect more of the forest. I don't think they have to go back through like the whole process of review, but I know there was already a neighborhood meeting scheduled around that. So there is, I think the applicant is doing more outreach. I don't think we have another formal layer.
I'd be surprised that a new entryway or a new road versus a bridge wouldn't go back to planning and zoning. Am I missing something from a legal standpoint?
It's a good question. I don't.
Brad is at the tip of the edge of his chair. Just tell us, Brad.
Yeah, it's a very good question. The answer is that it's really within council's discretion. The role of planning and zoning is to provide you with a recommendation and an analysis about any particular application for a zoning change. You have had that, and certainly it is not uncommon for there to be some changes to the proposal from the time it's reviewed by planning and zoning all the way up until council reviews it. That's not at all uncommon, as you have seen in the past. However, significant changes in council's own perception may warrant additional input from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So you have the authority to ask for applications to go back to planning and zoning if you feel that significant changes would warrant that.
Thank you.
Okay, last public hearing item is item D, and this is the required public hearing for your consideration of establishing a business improvement district in downtown Asheville. At this meeting, at the public hearing, the Chamber of Commerce is planning to provide a brief presentation, after which you'll conduct the public hearing. Following the public hearing, council is then required to hold 2 readings of the bid ordinance. So that's 2 votes, basically. The first is May 14th and the second is June 11th. So I just want to make sure that the community is aware while there's a public hearing scheduled for the bid on April 23rd, there is not a vote that is conducted on April 23rd. So again, this is just the public hearing, which is followed by 2 separate votes. And then finally, one of the other requirements is that there has to be a bid operational plan made available, which it has been. That bid operational plan can be viewed in the city clerk's office or on the Chamber's website at downtownashevillebid.com. Any questions on that item?
I just wanted to share a little information with colleagues. I'm not comfortable with the bid proposal where it stands right now. And I know I'm meeting with the Chamber again tomorrow. I know I've reached out to each of you. I'm thinking the best path forward for me personally will be to make some alternative proposals or a proposal of alternatives. And I'm talking with some of you. I know we have some time scheduled, but if anybody's interested in partaking in that process or kind of brainstorming with me, I'd be open to that and appreciative. I think after our Tuesday meeting is probably best in case they have made some changes from our last meeting. But if anybody's interested, please let me know.
So that concludes the review of the council agenda. So with that, we'll move to our council committees. And as Ms. Campbell mentioned earlier, we only have 1 committee to review, and that's Environment and Safety. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Campbell for that.
Thank you, Ben. And as noted, Environment and Safety Committee meets on April the 23rd at 11 o'clock. We have a number of items, 2 of which we are going to request action by the committee, and 2 are just for information. The informational items are our quarterly update regarding public safety. So we will have updates from the Asheville Police Department as well as the Asheville Fire Department. Again, giving quarterly crime statistics compared to the last quarter, and we will have similar information presented by the Asheville Fire Department. There are 2 items, as I noted, for action. Jurisdiction expansion request by UNCA Police Department. That is to authorize an agreement with UNCA to expand territorial jurisdiction of UNCA Police close to campus. We will have, and this is a request from UNCA police, we are planning to have someone from UNCA there to have us present and explain the rationale for this request. And then the last item that we have is the 2025 bike safety grant, which is a recurring kind of grant application regarding bike safety. And it's really, I think, for motorcyclists. And those are the items that we have for that committee. Any questions? Okay, great, thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to step backwards just to make one more share. On Monday, the 22nd, ahead of our meeting, the Downtown Commission's having their retreat, is going to have some talk about the bid as well. So I'll share that with you.
Thank you. Next item is review of the 8-week agenda. When I covered the bid, I noted the 2 votes that are forthcoming for that item. Other things I want to point out is we're in the middle of the budget season, so you have your budget presentations scheduled for May 14th. That's followed by the budget public hearing on May 28th, and that's followed by budget adoption on June 11th. And then also want to touch on the GO bond, the idea of a general obligation bond. So over the course of May, June, and July, you'll also have 3 kind of statutory required meetings that will set a public hearing for the bond orders and make sure that those are in a position, if they move forward, to be included as a referendum on the November ballot. So you have a lot of budget and bond check-ins over the next 2 months on your 8-week agenda. Any other items on that council would like to cover or has questions on?
I know one question about scheduling has come up as having conversations with the community around the bid. I know we're required to vote twice. I see the first, it says writing, but maybe reading of the bid would be on the May 14th. And then would we do it again on the 28th, or is it not yet scheduled?
June 11th. We've got it scheduled for May 14th and June 11th.
I see it there. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, if no other questions, we will now move to the other issues and updates. We have 3 items. The first is a budget process update. I think that probably Deborah and Tony McDowell will be providing that information, so I'll turn it over to them.
Okay, thank you, Dan. You recall we had supposedly our last budget work session last week or so, and April 9th, I believe. And you all gave us a lot of information that you wanted us to compile, and we've done so. But I wanted Tony to come in and just talk about what the next steps were in terms of how we're going to communicate that information, as well as get whatever additional questions that you have and or feedback that you have in terms of the initial discussion that we had around the budget. And I just really have to emphasize that getting a decision or some direction around compensation and benefits is vitally important to the overall budget process, because as we noted, 60+% of revenue needed for our budget, to balance the budget, is around compensation and benefits. So Tony, I will turn it over to you to kind of talk about the process.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Campbell, and good morning, everybody. Tony McDowell, Finance Director. So like Deborah said, I just want to kind of give an update on kind of where we are with the process. As Ms. Campbell mentioned, we had the work session on April 9th. We heard from you all, and we have a number of follow-up items that we need to get you all information about. And we're in the process right now of putting together a fairly extensive memo to respond to some of the questions and issues that you all raised at that work session. And right now we're targeting getting you all that memo by close of business on Monday. So you all will get that memo. Hopefully we'll address most or all of the questions that you all have raised at that last work session and any other work sessions as well. And then what we would ask of you all is to review that memo, and then any additional questions or feedback that you all have for us, if you could get it back to us by next Friday. What that will do, that will allow us some time to evaluate that feedback, assess any additional follow-up that we need to do with you all. And all of that is done with the goal of getting the city manager's budget to you all at your May 14th meeting. And to do that, we as city staff have to wrap up the numbers and give our budget team about a week to get the budget document finalized and ready to go. And so for that May 14th meeting, the budget document will need to go out on May the 10th. And so really budget staff will need that week before that to finalize the document. So we really will need to, as I said, wrap up the manager's proposed budget by May the 3rd from a numbers perspective. I'll remind you all once again that that's obviously not the end of the process. So just getting the manager's budget to you all is one step in the process. There will be approximately 6 weeks from the time you receive the budget until the last meeting in June, which would be the last opportunity for you all to approve it, for you all to make final decisions. So still some time, obviously, to hear feedback from you all before the final vote in June. But just wanted to give you all kind of an update on the process and where we're headed from here. And Deborah, I don't know if there's anything I missed that you might want to add to that.
No, I would only add that again, that if you can just remind them of the deadlines. Monday, we'll have the memo out. We would like for a response by that Friday, 26th or so, 5th, whatever that date is. And then we will assess whatever the questions, whatever, and figure out how do we get you all responses, and we'll go from there. Sage?
Thank you. I had a really interesting meeting with Asheville Fire Department president and a couple of AFD, and they had their own kind of budget proposal that was pretty thorough. I was pretty impressed and appreciative. And I had recommended they just reach out to you, Deborah, or Chief, or whoever, to just sit down and review it. And I would love to encourage you to do that so you can see, because they had a pretty creative solution that wasn't too terrible a number. And if Councilwoman, if they're reaching out to you, I recommend the same, just because we're pressed for time. You might be intrigued by their proposal as well.
Yeah, we'll make that outreach, especially Chief Case.
Yeah, I'm also supportive of that creative solution, but I also think we got a recommendation from Just Economics that provided that sort of like the missing middle of compensation. That would be intriguing to look at as well, because we've kind of only looked at one step or a humongous step, and we haven't looked at that middle step.
I'm not sure how I feel about what the firefighters were proposing, but in any event, if you were to do something like that, where we as a council, or Deborah would recommend it, we as a council consider it, I think it would be very difficult to do that just for the fire department. I think it would, automatically trigger, looking across departments. The Chief Lamb has shared with me a PowerPoint presentation that I think Councilwoman Mosley has seen. So she's doing the police academy regarding officer pay and kind of where we are in the grand scheme of things. So officer pay is very similar to what the firefighters have showed us in terms of competing cities and where we are with pay. So I just say that to say, I appreciate the firefighters' efforts and their creative solution to figure out how to raise their pay, but I think it will trigger a conversation across all departments in terms of competitive pay for folks in public works, or competitive pay for people,
Well, and Esther, the biggest takeaway I had that surprised me was that because we were seeing so much more retirement and loss of employees in AFD, we had started a second academy. So now we have 2 academies a year instead of 1, and that price tag was pretty hefty. And it's almost like if we were more proactive in the wage front, we would be able to retain people and not have to have the expense of the second academy. And that's where the creativity was coming. And I don't know how accurate that is and the numbers and stuff, but it's an interesting perspective. And when we talk about budgets, like that's the kind of stuff I want to get into. How can we get some real-time solutions that aren't just broad 4% across the board? I feel like there's some models that are out there that are a little more advantageous to pursue and look into.
Can I ask for a follow-up too? Because I get that we've been talking about how the firefighters have unique schedules, but then we're not willing to look at a unique solution. Seems a little like maybe I'm missing something here. Wouldn't we look at a unique solution for a unique schedule?
And absolutely we would, but as the mayor raised in terms of, we always talk about equity. Well, we want to ensure that everyone on our staff has the opportunity to be compensated equitably. And it is not something against the fire department or the police department, but we have to represent all skill sets from the sanitation workers on up and beyond.
Absolutely, Deborah. I have a slightly different opinion when it's our first responders. In this case, like AFD, they are our first responders. They're first on the scene for anything. And AAPD, obviously, we've been strapped trying to restaff them and improving it. But I do keep those two public safety departments a little different in my brain. And I don't want that to be, I don't want to pursue inequitable solutions for all of staff. I want us to pay as much as everybody, as much as we can for everyone in every department. But they do have a unique situation. And this community is experiencing crime and safety issues and escalating issues. And there are people.
And I totally understand the uniqueness of our public safety workers. I get that as well, but I also get that our other workers work as hard, work in a manner that they should be compensated fairly when we are, we're looking at adjustments. And plus there are other opportunities for pay in public safety that none of our other employees are eligible for. None, other than public safety workers.
I find when we're having this conversation, it feels very either or. And I want us to live in a place where it could be both. I think that for this current budget cycle, based on the information we were seeing at the work session on the 26th, it looks like I think staff's proposal is really the best way for this year to use fund balance. But I think it then means that next year, when we get information about the reval and there's a bunch of other context, I encourage us to not be pitting public safety versus others or be pitting lower line level versus management. Like, what will it take? What are the various choices for us to look at paying our full team well? And I think that we probably want to see some different strategies or scenarios of what that would be. But my sense is that that's a next year conversation, and maybe the Policy Finance Committee digs into that more over the course of the year. So it's not, after so much of the budget has been baking, but I'm eager to see at least what it'll take to move it all forward, because I just feel like the unintended consequence of us splitting out, whether it's by wage or by function, is that we break the team apart further. And then we have different parts of different communities arguing for their favorite part of the workforce. And it just feels like that's not, I think we need to move forward together.
Maggie, I agree that it is a yes or kind of no binary situation. A lot of times because our votes are binary, and that's not how life really is. That's one of the reasons why I'm trying to support this community-led third option to bring a different dish to the table. I do think that taking a step up for everyone that's not a percentage base could ultimately help, especially focus it on the middle. So we're not splitting up the team. But once again, at the end of the day, we're stuck in that binary of yes or no.
I guess I respectfully disagree, Kim. I feel like some of the proposals I've been hearing you are splitting up the team and making us pick, and that doesn't feel right to me.
Thank you for sharing that.
I mean, Kim, if we were to do, I mean, if, you know, when we talk to the firefighters, if you take a salary of $20.10 an hour, over the number of hours, 2,910, which includes all time in the firehouse, including sleeping, it would raise their salary to 58,491, which is actually higher than any city they showed us, because all these other cities pay in the same format we do. And it would be, according to Chief Lamb, our incoming police officers are getting paid $43,000 and change. So I think we would create a pretty difficult situation in our city if we just provided a change to one versus the other. And the firefighters are not asking us to reduce their hours. They're asking, I mean, what they said to us yesterday was essentially, we want to be paid competitively on an annual salary basis with our peers in this region and in the state. And they, you know, specifically mentioned some fire departments here in Buncombe County and the surrounding area. So I guess I'm getting a little bit baffled what the point is of having this contentious conversation, since I feel like all of council wants to pay all of our employees better. And I think we have, our biggest problem is not that we disagree about that, it's that we don't have the resources to do it. So we've got to figure that out, and that is really, really difficult. And I think you know, we've got a recommendation on the table for this next year for 4.11% from the manager, and we're using fund balance to pay for that. We're not going to raise taxes. I think council, sort of by their lack of saying something, was indicating they don't want to raise taxes this year. So, you know, I unfortunately, we don't have a lot to work with, and I am thinking ahead to next year, because we're going to be in a reval year. We're going to have a year where we're hopefully funding bonds that pass in November, and we're probably going to want to add to our employee salary again. So that's going to be impactful from a budgetary standpoint.
Well, thank you all. We appreciate your feedback, and stay tuned. I think the next item is the National Community Survey, and that is going to be Dawa.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. We're going to move through this presentation pretty quickly. I apologize for how dense this is, but we're going to get through it quickly. My name's Dawa Hitch, and I serve as the Communication and Public Engagement Director, and today I'll be giving an overview of the results of the National Community Survey. It's my pleasure to do that. Next slide. A few key takeaways from the survey. One, Asheville residents continue to experience a positive quality of life. Residents praise opportunities for education, arts, and culture in Asheville. You'll notice that there is an asterisk there. I'll get a little bit more into that as we move through the presentation. The economy continues to be a key priority area. Safety remains a focus, and as growth continues, general affordability and housing availability remain areas of top concern. Next slide. All right, so the survey was administered by Polco in partnership with the National Research Center. Next slide. And this is the 5th time that the city of Asheville has conducted the National Community Survey. Previous surveys were conducted in 2008, 2015, 2018, and 2021. The results of this survey are statistically weighted to reflect Asheville overall, and there's a 95% confidence interval with a plus or minus 5% margin of error for the results that you'll see coming up. Next slide. Resident surveys are really helpful for staff to be able to do their work. One, they allow for us to monitor trends and satisfaction of the delivery of services year over year. They can give us a general idea of our community satisfaction with the services that we provide. They can inform the budget and strategic planning decisions. And we can also benchmark against other cities, which is very helpful. Next slide. You can see here, one of the benefits of working through Polco and the National Research Center is that they've got more than 500 comparison cities taking the same survey, which helps us with that benchmarking. Next slide. We'll go over an overview of the survey results. Next slide. We'll start with some questions that were oriented towards how our community feels about the quality of the services that the city of Asheville provides. Here you can see there's different shades of green. The lighter green represents areas where we're benchmarking lower than other cities. The darker green are areas where we are benchmarking higher than benchmark cities. And again, this is the satisfaction in a number of different livability areas. So in this particular chart, you can see that we benchmark higher than other cities with overall opportunities for education, culture, and the arts. And we're benchmarking lower, for example, in the area of overall quality of the transportation system with 31% satisfaction in that area. Next slide. This slide is focusing on how important our community believes these services are. So you can see that our community thinks that all of these services are important and that we're benchmarking similarly to other cities. Next slide. Okay, so when you put those things together, it gives staff some great insight into areas where additional attention and or resources might be allocated. So here you can see the importance is very high, and then the quality of those services is lower than the median. So the areas that are within that are mobility, safety, the economy, and utilities. I will note that the utilities here are more comprehensive than just the water quality. I mean, the water utility. It also includes other utilities, and we can dig further into just what it looks like for water, but utilities in general is what that particular data point is looking at. Next slide. All right, so key findings, we're going to jump right in. Next slide. 1, residents continue to experience a high quality of life. Next slide. So about 8 in 10 residents gave excellent or good ratings to Asheville as a place to live and their neighborhood as a place to live. And we're very or somewhat likely to remain in Asheville for the next 5 years. Next slide. Key finding number 2, residents praise opportunities for education, arts, and culture. Next slide. So here's where we can dig into that a little bit further. You can see the dark green bars are areas where we are benchmarking much higher, where there's high satisfaction with the availability of opportunities within education, culture, and arts. Where we are benchmarking lower, which is why there was an asterisk, is in K through 12 education. The satisfaction rate for that is 54%. And then in the availability of affordable quality childcare and preschool, the satisfaction there is 25%. So I just wanted to be transparent about that, that while overall it looks like we're benchmarking higher, there are 2 significant areas where we're benchmarking lower. Next slide.
Dala?
Yes, ma'am.
Hold on. If you go back to that, so can you explain, you've got one there that says overall opportunities for education, culture, and the arts, and it's really high, but then when you pull out education specifically, it's low. So is that just people are sitting there going, well, I'm good on culture and arts, so I'm going to go high on this one. Okay, so that's the kind of conflict you get when you pull those pieces out.
Yeah, the overall opportunities is just that kind of an overall. What is their sense? It's a more comprehensive. They've stacked some questions into that to give a sense. But when you start to look at the individual questions that make up that overall rating, you can get into the details of where there's satisfaction or not. And that's where we were able to pull out the K through 12 and childcare. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. Okay, key finding number 3. Let's see. So this has to do back to the economy. So you can see here, Asheville, we're benchmarking higher with Asheville as a place to visit. 89% of respondents rated that very highly. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we can see that there was 10% satisfaction with the cost of living, and that is definitely benchmarking lower than other cities. Next slide. Finding number 4, safety remains a top priority. Next slide. All right, so here are a few of the questions that made up that particular topic area. You can see that we're benchmarking similarly to other cities with how safe people feel in their neighborhood during the day. Then we're looking at how safe people feel in the downtown commercial area during the day, property crime, and violent crime, we're benchmarking lower. Next slide. All right, key finding number 5, as Asheville grows, general affordability and housing availability remain areas of top concern. Next slide. So you can see here, again, there are a number of questions related to this topic area, and we are benchmarking similarly to other cities in all areas. Of note is that 87% of residents rated affordable housing development as an essential or important investment for the city. Next slide. All right, so those were the questions.
You're going really fast. Can you do?
I know. I know.
Like, so, say what? I don't see where you just read
the 87%.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay, it's down in the bottom corner. I'm sorry.
It is. And yeah, because this is certainly just a brief overview. It's a really long report with lots of different questions. And so we've tried to pack them into these focus areas. And there's a section where residents had the opportunity to identify how important or essential a number of different services are. And that's where that block came from.
And on this, Dawa, so that's like the box at the bottom left, but to the right, the bar chart, please rate each of the following. That's on importance to them, or that's on how well we're doing?
Each of our delivery of the service.
I think that's really interesting, because I think that we as a council, and the council before that I joined into, has really been prioritizing affordable housing. And I think that's aligned around the community. And as we look at the other rows in this bar chart, there's a lot of other things that fold into and inform affordable housing, right? Like there is an ecosystem of challenge here. And it, to me, just says that we need to keep doubling down on affordable housing. And as we look at land use planning and zoning, well-planned residential growth, these other things will contribute to our affordable housing goals. And just really grateful that as a council, we've been opening that aperture and looking a little broader in this last year. And as we look into the next year, as we really look at zoning and looking at some zoning reform to support a housing, better housing. The other thing I'd say is, compared to some of the other charts you've been showing us, these are some of the lowest percentages. So I feel like we could look at this two ways. We could look at this and be hard on ourselves, or we could, apologies, I'm watching Ted Lasso right now, but we could be like, only way to go is up. Like I think that this is a really big opportunity place for us to focus energy coming forward, and this will really support our housing and affordable illegals.
Yeah, that variety.
Maggie,
I'm sorry, Esther.
I was just going to say, I like your positivity. I read this slide to mean that people don't like development. People are very opposed to seeing new development, and they're really pushing back against that. That's kind of how I read this overall slide to me. But maybe I'm interpreting it incorrectly, but I mean, I'm sort of marrying this with the kinds of sentiment I hear out in the community and the sort of feedback we get.
I had a little bit of different perspective when I see the variety of housing options down there. Like, this is a really key one to me in all of our housing planning, because it touches on so many of the others in that list. And we don't do this well. I was just talking to a couple of you. I was driving down in Hendersonville recently, and they have such a diverse housing stock. And I'm really curious what they're doing differently, or what we could be doing. I mean, this missing middle study is the goal here, right? We're hoping to achieve a more variety of housing options, which will lend to several others. I'm thankful for the list, really, the more detail. It's very helpful.
Rachel.
And thank you for that comment, Councilmember Turner. I just wanted to note, DAWA has done a great job of condensing a really detailed report that we're going to make available to all of you as part of the follow-up report. So if you have additional questions following review of that more detailed report, we're happy to come back at a future agenda briefing. DAWA did a great job adhering to the assignment of 10 minutes to cover that very detailed report, and that's why you're getting such high-level summary information today.
All right, and I so appreciate all of the comments because it is complex, and we'll just note that one of the opportunities that we have with this survey is an outside set of eyes that have packaged all of these different questions into this growth and development, and that's based on other cities as they're doing it as well. So I just wanted to highlight that that's another great opportunity we have with this survey, just to have some outside eyes on all of the different pieces, as Councilmember Ullman mentioned, that really go into this particular facet of livability. Okay, next slide. So in addition to those questions that are similar across other surveys that are administered in other cities, we also had the opportunity to ask some specific questions that could help guide some of staff's work and where we are putting time and attention. This slide has to do with affordable housing projects, and we work closely with the staff that's working on affordable housing to develop these questions and to get some insight. And here you can see that in general, our community supports investments in affordable housing. That's probably no surprise to anybody. But what this does give us is some insight into how much support there is for some of the different strategies. And that's not to say that this is a vote for what we follow or what we don't. It just also gives an opportunity for us, for example, to know we might need to do some more education around what implementing zoning initiatives to increase housing density might mean. You can see here in this chart that it's the one that appears to be not have as great of support, and that's not a vote again, but that just gives staff some insight. Next slide. Okay, we also were able to ask a special topic question around reparations. I want to note here, the question was how much support is there? And we looked at the 5 impact focus areas, and you can see here that there is significant support, over 80% for every single impact focus area having investments put into it. Next slide. This one was around homelessness response. And again, these are some different strategies that could be pursued. There's work happening in all of these areas. And again, you can see that our community is supportive of investments in these strategies. Next slide. So very quickly, I'm going to go through some trend highlights. So this is how's the city of Asheville doing over time? So areas where we're trending up since 2021 are whether or not people have carpooled, the quality of waste pickup, yard waste pickup, trending up, and then the quality of recreation programs and classes is also trending up. Areas where we're trending down are in the quality of crime prevention, the availability of affordable quality food, and in the overall quality of the utility infrastructure. And you can see that there's how many points we're down related to each of those. Next slide. So in addition to trends, we can also do comparisons, as I mentioned earlier. We can benchmark against other cities, and we can benchmark against other cities that have a tourism-based economy. Additionally, we can look at demographic responses in all the areas that are listed there. You'll see next to race and Hispanic origin that there's an asterisk, and I just wanted to be very clear that this survey groups those as white alone or not white alone. And the reason for that is because needing to get a sample size where there could be some level of statistical significance. And when we're looking at a number of different races, often the number's too small. So this is how they have chosen to report out that detail. So when we go through the next slide or two, you'll see that things are broken down into white alone or not white alone if we're talking about race. Next slide. Okay, so looking at council's strategic priority areas, I pulled out a few questions to show some of that comparison information. Under neighborhood and climate resilience, the quality of emergency preparedness is similar to other cities. Of note is that people age 18 to 35 are less satisfied with that quality of preparedness than people aged 55 plus. Good information for staff to have. In the area of equitable, affordable housing and stability, we're ranking, we're much lower. We've talked about that, benchmarking than other cities. We rank 54 of 60 for cities that have a tourism economy. When we're looking at improving and maintaining infrastructure and core services, An example of that could be the quality of the bus or transit service. We're similar to other cities. And when we're looking at white alone, people who identified as white alone are less satisfied with the service than people who identified as not white alone. So just another example of where we can dig into the data a little bit more. Next slide. Reimagining public safety. How safe do you feel in downtown during the day? We're benchmarking lower than other cities, and I'll note there's no significant difference between age or race on these responses. Finally, reparations. When we're looking at the variety of businesses and service establishments, overall, we benchmark higher than other cities. But of note, when you look at people who identified as not white alone, they're significantly less satisfied than people who identify as white alone. Important information, again, for us to have. Next slide. That takes us to our key takeaways. Looking at the results of the survey, residents continue to experience a positive quality of life. There's praise for education, arts, and culture. Economy continues to be a priority. Safety remains a priority. And as growth continues, general affordability and housing availability remain areas of top concern. That concludes my presentation.
Great info. Thank you, Dawa. I look forward to seeing all of it.
Fantastic. Happy, yes. And as Rachel said, we're happy to provide additional information in any topic area. I will say that the results of the survey are available right now on the city's website. If you go to the front page of the website, you can just put in National Community Survey in the search bar and get to the full report.
It sounds like you think there could be like, I could see PED digging into like a whole tranche of them and environment and safety. Like, I like this stuff. I find it really interesting, but I think just the review and space to discuss as councilwomen could be really interesting what would come out for us. So something to think about as we're doing agendas. Maybe not. First step is just looking at the depth that is up on the website. Really grateful, Dawa. Thank you.
Kim.
I think one layer that, we got to see this at the Neighborhood Advisory Committee level. That was so helpful, Dawa, to hear this presentation multiple times. That I'm thinking back on the meeting I had at the Chamber of Commerce yesterday, and I'd be interested in knowing where we rank that 54 of 60 tourist-based economies. How many of the cities on that list are not receiving the sales tax revenue they generate? So I don't know if there's a way to look at the state legislations around that. How many of those cities fall in states that have different controls than we do? But I imagine that we're providing a lot of services, core services for our daytime population that those cities might have other revenue streams for.
And adding to that, which ones of them have business improvement districts? That might be an additional revenue stream that they've pursued to support them.
All right. Thank you all for your interest. And as Rachel said, we will be including the link to the document in the follow-up report. But as Dawa said, you can go out to our website right now and dig into it if you just can't wait to get your arms around it, that study. So I think we're going to move to the next one, which is the transit overview. And Jessica, and I'm not sure if Amber is going to join us or not, or if you're going to go solo. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Amber will be tag teaming towards the last part of the presentation. So today we'd like to give you guys a brief update about some of our ongoing transit related issues, including funding, but also touch on some of the projects that we are working on. Next slide, Katie. Our key takeaways are that since about 2016, the city has invested a substantial amount more in the transit system from an operational perspective and a capital perspective. And we are in need of additional revenue sources in order to maintain the service that we have at the moment. So existing service levels continue to get more and more expensive every year, as well as fleet purchases and facility improvements. And we would like to continue to implement the 2018 Transit Master Plan. However, additional resources are going to be needed in order to do so. And then finally, one of the topics that we want to discuss is that we are recommending utilizing the previously budgeted $300,000 that we had originally intended to work with the county on a regional master plan. We would like to turn our attention to doing a City of Asheville only focused plan, which we're calling a comprehensive operations and financial assessment. We'll get into all of those details more. Next slide, Katie. So just to overview this presentation, I'll start by going over some of our high-level goals for the system and a background. Then I will talk about what our existing service is, and then focus on what our budget is. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about our fleet, our facilities, and then we're going to end with the conversation about the $300,000 of planning funds. Next slide. So this is kind of oversimplified in terms of what our goals are, but I would say that our primary goals are to increase ridership and provide access. And the graphic that's on the screen is meant to show what often is kind of the existential push and pull when you talk about transit systems. The red lines with the buses is meant to show that higher frequency on corridors is what will really drive ridership higher. The flip side of that is you're providing less coverage out into the community if you're focusing your frequency on key corridors. So it's always difficult to do both things well. And so you have to make a choice in some instances, or in all instances. How are you going to spend your money? Are you going to have a lot of routes that go out to multiple places so that you're increasing access? Or are you going to try to have less routes with more frequency so that you can really focus on driving your ridership higher and getting cars off the road? Next slide. Just a little bit of background. This is meant to show where we adopted the Transit Master Plan, which was in July of 2018. It is a 10-year master plan that had recommendations for every year. However, one of the things that it lacked, in our opinion, is that it didn't really have a realistic funding strategy that not only looked at what would be the resource needs for the operating side of the system, but also the resource needs for the fleet and the facilities that we have to have, kind of the back of the house, if you will, that support the transit system overall. We were able to do a pretty significant service increase in January of 2020. It was a 25% increase, but that was actually only a portion of the Transit Master Plan's first year. The recommendations that were in year one were quite lofty, but we did increase service 25%, and that was a combination of adding frequency on some routes and adding some new routes. Fast forward a couple months later, we had the beginning of COVID, and we had a significant slowdown for our system. We had, prior to COVID, actually, we had issues with maintaining driver levels. That has continued even to this day, although it is getting slightly better. But we had originally budgeted to take the next step for the Transit Master Plan and increase service frequency on our two southern routes, but we had to press pause on that due to driver shortages and budgetary reasons. So the last square is TBD. We would like to implement the next recommendations for the Transit Master Plan. And again, that would include the S3 and the S6, increasing frequency, as well as adding late night service. Next slide. So just a high level summary of our transit service as it stands now. We have our fixed route transit system, which is ART. And then we also have our paratransit system, which is federally required. And we actually contract that service to Buncombe County. Our operating budget for transit is, for this year, for FY24, is $13.5 million. And just to give you a sense of the, it's a pretty big portion of the overall operating budget for the city of Asheville. So it's 8% of the overall budget. Our two big expenses, well, our biggest expense is the operating contract. So we contract out our service for operations and maintenance. We currently are in the 7th year of an 8-year contract with RATP Dev. So it is, we are going to be required to rebid out that service again soon, which is kind of it's a pretty significant effort for us to take on. So we'll be working on that soon. Next slide. I know this looks like a lot of words, but what we're trying to show is just get a sense of the number of routes and what our frequencies are. So we have 19 routes, and you can see that the worst frequency, which means like the time that it takes for one run to be made, is 120 minutes, and that's on our longest route, which is the 170 that goes out to Black Mountain. So we've got 2 routes that are 90 minutes frequency, and that is the S3 and the S6. We have 10 routes that are at 1 hour, and then we have 5 routes that are at 30 minutes. And if you think back to that graphic, when you have such large headways, it becomes extremely difficult for people to plan trips around that, especially if they need to change buses. So frequency is key to convenience, which is key to getting folks to ride the bus. Kim.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little note here that it doesn't yet say like we have approved housing on transit corridors that are on the S3 and S6 that are on the 90 minutes. So right now you might look at like Biltmore Village and Airport and not see we just approved dense housing development on that route as well. So I just wanted to name that, you know, in addition to employers, like these are neighborhoods that are familiar and existing, but we're adding new neighborhoods on board too.
Great, thank you, Kim. Next slide. The good news is that our ridership is going up. That last dot, keep in mind, is a projection based on where we are now year to date, but we are 15% over last year at this point in time. And the previous year, well, you can see we had a dip in FY22, but generally speaking, we are seeing increased ridership. Some routes are still not quite to where they were pre-COVID. Some routes are more. So, but the good news is that we're trending upwards, and so I'm happy to be able to share that. Next slide. So this is where I'm going to turn to talking a little bit more in detail about the funding side of this system. And we'll talk about the city's contributions, which the general fund and the parking fund in combination have generally been the primary funding sources for the system, including the paratransit expenses as well. So, and as I've mentioned, you know, what we're seeing is increased costs, even at the same service level, even not including fleet or facilities, just our operating costs go up year after year, just like every other operating cost across the city. And unfortunately, we've had to use ARPA funds in order to fill gaps the last 2 years. And so that is a signal that we are operating at a deficit. The parking fund has contributed about $7 million since 2019 to the system. And that's been a huge source of revenue for the system. And, but, that has come at a cost, I think, on the parking side. But we also are seeing that our share of federal funds in our region has been going down as well. And that is related to the way our metropolitan planning organization allocates those funds. And we'll talk more about that. Next slide. So the blue line is the city of Asheville, and this graph is focusing just on one source of federal funds, although it is our primary source of federal funds, and it is the only source that is dedicated. It's not competitive. We don't have to apply or compete for it, but it's our annual allocation of urban funds. They're called the 5307 funds. And in 2015, the MPO went through a process of retooling the formula that they use to distribute these funds to all of the different transit systems in our region. So Buncombe County, Haywood County, Henderson County, we all split this pot. And so the formula changed in 2015, and you can see that our share of those funds went down significantly, and we are finally getting back to a place where our share of the funds is back to about the 2016 level. So that has had an impact on our overall funding. Next slide. This is a lot of information, but it's meant to show our primary expenses for the transit system between what's currently budgeted for this fiscal year back to 2019. That first column, our ATPDEV contract, that's our operations and maintenance contract. It's the most significant source of it's our most significant expense. You can see that the expense has gone up significantly since 2019, as has our paratransit and our fuel. Really everything has gone up. Now, granted, we did have service increases in 2020, so that is embedded in this, and some of those costs are representative of that. Next slide. Now, this slide is meant to show the revenue sources, and across the top are the revenue sources that we have. The general fund and the parking fund are the biggest sources of revenue for the system. And you can see that the general fund support has doubled since 2019. The parking fund has actually been reduced the last few years due to needs in parking. Our state funding that we get from the state is pretty steady. It hasn't really changed. We didn't get it in 2021 due to COVID, but we continue to get that, and that comes through the budget process. The ones that I've highlighted are the federal funds that we received for COVID. So the ARPA funds and CARES funds. You can see that we have had to use those funds, especially in the last 2 years, to backfill the deficit in the fund. 2021 and 2022, those funds were actually used for additional service. If you recall, we had Young Transportation supplementing our service. So a lot of those funds went to that, as well as other COVID-related expenses. Kim.
On this chart, in that general fund amount where we see the leap in 2019 to 2020, is that where we see the change to RAPPDEV and the fixed route?
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess my curiosity for today is, if in your operational study that's being proposed by staff, is it possible to look at whether or not it has been a good value for our dollars to switch to the type of contract that we have with RAPPDEV? I know there's like the fixed route and then there's other options, but since we now have two paths that we've taken, I imagine there's like some cost savings on one side, but there's probably expenses on the other, like staff oversight of the contract.
And we'll be updating that contract this coming year, right? So it's perfect timing for questions like that, because now we're going to open up another long-term relationship with a project partner, whether it's RAPPDEV or someone else.
Yeah. Amber, did you have your?
I don't have a quick answer yet to that yet. Is that something that can be considered in the operations plan? Like, are we going to look at the type of contract?
I don't believe that we are going to look at the type of contract. I think the city used to have just a management contract. Now it's a fully turnkey contract, which of course is going to have more expenses directly from that contract. But I think what I've seen overall is that the overall expense was more at if you're comparing the level of service, the overall expense was more when it was just a management contract. And when I say just management, I mean that the city was paying for all of the operations and reimbursing all of the operations, and the contract with the contractor was only for the general manager of the system and I think the directors that oversaw the employees, but now everything is under them.
So it's more likely a RFP for the management contract.
I think so.
There was a change from the management contract to a turnkey operation contract. And that was analyzed. I'd have to go back. I wasn't here during that time, but you did go through a process and folks decided it was better to do the operations turnkey and do an RFP than for the management. You really couldn't go out and analyze it for an RFP for the service, but I guess staff could take a look at that. But this is just a recent change from 2016 to 2017 when the contract was implemented. And I wanted the 19 to 2020, the increase in costs are associated with the service increase. The contract, this beginning of the contract from the previous operator to the current operator was in 2017 to 2018.
Okay, thank you.
So quick, Jessica, we just did this, fees and adjustments for the parking rates and stuff. Is there a idea of what kind of future revenues the parking fund is going to be able to commit?
I would say at this budget year, we are still the parking fund is still providing the funding. I think, what do we have? 952,000. We have, I believe, for the proposed budget this coming fiscal year, it's proposed to provide around the same amount next year. And so I think it's something that with the Dixon study, which is the parking operational study, we will have a better sense of what our revenue growth will be in this coming year, but also if and when we do additional expansions. So the fee increases that were just passed by council that go into effect on July 1, much of that is really meant to be tied to the maintenance needs that have been programmed. I think that future expansions are probably the better opportunity for us to consider committing additional revenue to parking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, agree. I really wish we could expand meters sooner than later. I know that's coming probably for next year. Could you go back one slide, possibly? I have one more question. Oh, 2 slides, sorry. One, yes, this. I remember at PED, we talked about this a little bit. Is there anything we can do in this slide to improve our percentages? I mean, I'm not sure why the county is getting more.
So I think, yes, I think there's room for conversation with the MPO and the members of the MPO. It's definitely, so the MPO represents the region and we are just one jurisdiction out of, I think, like 30 jurisdictions that are on the MPO board. So it's, it would require a lot of collaboration and communication with everyone in order to be able to retool that formula that's used. But I think that what we're seeing is that some of these folks are not actually able to utilize their funds in a reasonable time frame because they don't necessarily have the matching funds that are required. So
does that mean there's potentially funds out there unused right now we could go after? So yeah, and Pam, are you our MPO rep?
I'm one of two. The mayor has joined me in being the MPO rep, and our county is Edwards and Sloan. So I'm glad we came back to the slide because of the conversation around potential partnerships with, like, for example, Ferry Road. When I'm having conversations with county commissioners, it's like one of the reasons there wasn't support for a joint study is because there's more appetite to do service than study. And so I get that in a previous slide, Jessica, you presented that we would like to do the increased service to South Asheville. But I wonder if maybe what we could do better as a council is communicating to staff that we would like to see and ask that the county do the funding of it. When we look at this slide, it's an opportunity for the county to come in and start testing out that service versus study that they might have more appetite for. But if we're not providing that kind of direction, then we're not letting staff really level up in the partnership part. Another thing that I've heard recently that might be helpful is that the South Asheville service, if the county were to use some of these funds to help with the expansion, starting with South Asheville, but then eventually also to Ferry Road and other expansions in the transit master plan, is that we don't have to start at the beginning of the fiscal year. What if we, for example, had S3, S6 service expansion on South Asheville, to South Asheville, to the housing that we've been approving on transit corridors, while ridership is going up, but ask the county to come in with these funds to do it. And if maybe that window opportunity to look at a January 1 start time would give staff more time to on-ramp it.
Well, just to go backwards a little bit, keep in mind that we're already operating at a deficit, right? So we've had to use multiple millions of dollars of ARPA to break even the last 2 years. So,
right. So that's why the paratransit, these funds, if we're not sending forward and I get that the operation study may help with this, but if we're not sending forward the message to the county that we can't do the expansion without the partnership, then is it possible that it's these funds or the paratransit funds that they could come with an in-kind donation, for example, or in-kind partnership?
Jessica, maybe taking a step back, if you could describe a little bit the results of the triennial review and the workshop that you and Amber just came from to work with our subrecipients. Buncombe County is one of those, on improving their spending plans and the efforts that we have to have them be a little more specific and ultimately working with them to ensure that they're spending their FTA grant dollars more quickly.
Sure. So Amber and I just came from a workshop that was held by us because the city of Asheville is the designated recipient, which means that we are the caretaker and the distributor and the monitor of all of the federal transit funds. So the MPO has the formula, they create the formula, and they have the power to create the formula for how that money is distributed. However, we are the ones, since we're the largest agency, that administer all of it. So we have seen since 2015 that the allocation for the other systems went up substantially. However, their systems are quite small in comparison to ours. And so their total budgets are a lot smaller than the city of Asheville's are. And therefore their matching funds, they have to be able to provide match on federal funds. And so what's happening is they're not able to expand their systems because they don't have the matching funds available, yet they're getting more funds allocated to them than they can actually spend. So they're getting more, but they can't expand because they don't have matching funds. And so they're sitting on funds and pushing them out in a very long time frame. And so it's like this stacking effect because you get an allocation every year. So every year you get X number of dollars, but if you're only spending 20% of it because you don't have the match, it just continues to pile up. And so we had several findings from our triennial review related to this. And ultimately the city of Asheville is responsible for ensuring the timely expenditure of funds. And so even though we're able to spend our funds in a timely manner, our subrecipients have not been. And so we are being dinged for that, if you will. And so that is as a region, if FTA looks at us as a region and says, hey, you guys have like millions and millions of dollars that are unobligated and unspent, it's a problem, and it's a risk for them, and they have cited us for that. So we're in a process right now of working with our subrecipients to say that we're going to have a policy that is going to require that funds be expended or they be returned to the pot, if you will, for other agencies to utilize. But that is a conversation that we've just started and is going to take some time to work with them. But that's not talking about changing the formula. That's just talking about spend your allocations within a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if there's if there is this timeliness factor, and I'm happy to follow up with the MPO level and get a cohort together to look at this and bring some more information to council. But I'm wondering if a bigger timeliness factor might help us with some of these, not only funding gaps for partnership, but also the other parts of the system that a lot of times the city gets pressure for, like, we're supposed to do everything. We're the superhero in the region. But this graph tells me that, that we have potential partnerships that we're not fully tapping into. And every single person in the city of Asheville is also a resident of the county. So I think we probably need some more information to come back once we have that answer about the timeliness.
Mm-hmm. Amber, did you want to?
Yeah, we can provide additional information. We are working with all the subrecipients to ensure that we try to help them spend their funds. We do not want to return any. There is an availability of funds. These funds are available for 5 years to spend and obligate. So we are working with the subrecipients on these spending plans that we just received, and those that go past that. Some have utilized 1 year of allocation for 5 to 6 years out. So we are addressing that and trying to work collaboratively with our partners as the subrecipients. But we can provide the information. Out of the $34 million that have been allocated to the Asheville urbanized area, only 45.6% have been spent.
In what time frame, Amber, is that?
From 2017 to today. Actually, that's just.
So how do we get that? So how do we leverage those funds? I mean, since we're able to spend the funds and we need the funds, how do we work on getting those reallocated?
We send you to the MPO.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, the goal here is that the real goal is that systems are serving, that are growing and serving more people, right? Whether it's us or others, like at the end of the day, we want the funds to be spent. I think there's multiple steps that we're gonna take, and we're gonna be working with our grant recipients as closely as possible. I think there's conversations that we could have at the MPO level about the formula funds, the formula itself. But at the end of the day, even if we had 100% of these funds, it's still it's still necessary for us to find additional resources because the federal funding is only maybe 15 to 20% of our overall costs at the moment. That's not even including facility needs. So yes, we need to try to work to maybe utilize some of these funds that are sitting on the table, but overall we have to find additional sources beyond that.
And there's also a concern that this funding, if there is a reallocation process or the unobligated funds, it would be one-time funding, and it would be hard to establish and expand services based on this if it's not a sustainable funding source based on the allocation model.
Right. We
And in the,
we can have a whole workshop on this.
We did.
Yeah, well.
And I'll say, PED has been digging into this some more. I do think that this slide is useful, but I think that there's a bigger fundamental story is that transit agencies of our size have more diverse revenue sources. And fundamentally, even if we maneuver this, the play is maybe $500,000. Maybe I'm getting that numbers wrong, but I think there's bigger conversations which anchored almost at the beginning of the slide deck of like our fundamental design and theory of how we will have a long-term healthy transit system. And it oversimplifies a continuum of high frequency or geographic spread, but us going through this comprehensive operations assessment process that staff are proposing allow us to look at where we slide if this is a scale, and maybe we need to move it a little bit, and that could open up completely different ways to financially support a healthy system.
Right.
And so I think that this is an important chart to look at, but I think again, like imagine if we're literally moving a peg down a continuum, that type of we see with other systems that is where there's better financial strategies, as well as the elephant in the room that other big cities in North Carolina, to which we are becoming one of, have dedicated quarter-cent sales tax for, which has been a hard conversation for us to have. I continue to hope that we can discuss enabling legislation for us to pursue that at the city level, because I think that the case for this is stronger. But I also think that as we grow, more and more folks out into the county where we currently have the legislative authority might see the value in this and hope that we can grow to it at whatever jurisdiction soon, because that really is will be the thriving factor if we can move towards that or not. And I think the last thing I'll say is I really appreciate the comprehensive operation assessment strategy you're pursuing, because as we hope and work towards broader will towards getting some type of sales tax revenue, we are running a leaky boat financially. And it has been going to the parking fund. It has been going to ARPA. And I'm worried if we don't step back and look at this, we're going to have dramatic service cut conversations, which is the last thing I want to do. I would much rather zoom out, do this assessment now, see what type of tweaks can keep us having some sustained excellent service while we grow towards the bigger future of transit.
I think the mayor had a question.
Maggie said, Maggie was saying that her estimate, best case scenario, if we were to leverage some of these funds, would be about $500,000. I think, are you saying annually? That would be what we'd be looking at. Is there agreement about that? Is that kind of what we're looking at?
I don't want to say that number.
Yes, I'm not sidestepping the we need a permanent funding solution conversation. That's top priority. But I'm just trying to understand as a representative on the MPO what the conversation is there and what we'd be talking about as a potential resource.
I think we need to have some more offline conversations about it, and I don't want to say any particular numbers because I think there's the funds that have already been allocated and obligated, and there's funds that have been allocated and not obligated, which basically means they haven't been programmed. And then we've got allocations coming every year. So it's not, it's more complicated than just saying like, we want you to give us X amount every year of your allocation. I think we need to be a little bit more, it's a little more nuanced than that. And we're not asking for anything from them at this moment. We're just trying to get everybody on the same page about the requirements for spending funds.
Yeah, we're doing our due diligence to work with the subrecipients. We've been not fully staffed within our transit division to, manage the grants and do the award management and give it its due diligence. So we are taking these spending plans and working with the subrecipients on upcoming programming and funding needs, and making sure it's clear that there's other avenues, or if there's something additional funds or programs that they want to provide. That's the step we're at right now, just in terms of developing the plan and looking at the funds and what they have available on their allocations and what can be utilized in the communities in our region.
Sage?
Yeah, just real quick, I just thank you, Jessica and Amber. I mean, I've been removed from transit committees this whole time, but I've always been concerned about just frequency, budget, what it's done to the parking fund, and now the new fees to cover it. I mean, it's just not, I think the leaking boat was a great example, as I love boats, but we're bailing it out in all the wrong ways. I'm so thrilled to see that we are going to do some kind of assessment and that there's some energy from staff behind it that are really pointed. Like, this is a great presentation. We had a great discussion at PED if anybody wants to go back and watch it. It gives me hope, because I'm really concerned about the longevity of this current plan, our inability to even fulfill what we set out to do. And we have to get real about it because it's impacting so many other aspects of the community. I mean, we know transportation on average costs residents about 25% of their income. And we've got to deal with this. It's just going to get worse. I'm so thankful, ladies. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So given the time that we're at right now, what we're going to do is we're going to skip the middle part of the presentation and come back and do that at the May 9th meeting. And really that middle part is talking about our fleet needs and our facility needs and giving you an update about the Art Place project. But what we're really wanting to focus on is the conversation around the comprehensive operations analysis. So I'm going to hand it over to Amber, and she's going to walk through what that looks like with you guys.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the staff recommendation for the $300,000 that was improved in the current fiscal year's budget. For fiscal year 24, there's $300,000 in the budget to conduct a regional transit master plan with the county. That was the original intent and scope of the funds. The county did not choose to participate and provide funding, so the study did not take place. We have seen that there's been significant changes that have occurred with our transit system and our ridership patterns post-COVID, and that there is a need for us to kind of zoom out, look at our system's performance and health of our service delivery, and make sure we are utilizing our resources effectively and meeting the needs of our community. We've noticed the recovery has not been linear among some of the routes. Some have come back to pre-COVID, while others have not. And there just needs to be a reanalyze. We need to reanalyze the routes and the service delivery mechanisms. So we are recommending that we utilize these funds to conduct a comprehensive operational and financial assessment that would focus on our post-COVID changes in our travel patterns and demographics since our transit master plan service increase initial implementation that occurred in January of 2020. The goals of this assessment would be to evaluate the current transit performance, identify our operational improvements and efficiencies, assessing the needs for our future transit master plan recommendations and other more recent discussed possibilities, including the county's Ferry Road project, evaluating our additional revenue needs and partnership opportunities, and then preparing for our next year's transit contract rebidding. Next slide. Some of the objectives of the comprehensive operations and financial assessment, I'm going to refer to it as the COA. Some of the objectives would include evaluating our transit system strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, what we're currently delivering in service. It would assess our current and immediate service patterns, schedules, the route efficiency, our ridership data, and our system health and performance. It would recommend immediate and near-term operational improvements in advance of our operations and contract or maintenance contract. It could help us explore better use of our electric and other types of fleet vehicles in ART service. And it would also allow us to leverage the work that will be happening for ART Place. Some of the benefits that we would see in Asheville would provide us with a detailed system-wide analysis for informed service enhancements and expansions and next steps. It would identify our realistic financial and resource needs for present and the future needs. It would also offer us a somewhat of an implementation roadmap that would be informed by our transit master plan insights. This would be a scope change. The original scope and the focus of the 300,000 was for a joint planning effort. This would be city specific, looking at our needs and our ART service improvements. Next slide.
Just want to jump in here on, I think having clear objective statements is really productive and really helpful. And I've been reading through other COAs, and I think that is a good practice. I also have seen other COAs that go more precise to talk about actual goals, because ultimately a lot of what this assessment will do is design thinking. Well, if we tweaked it this way, then what? Well, if we expanded here, then what? And so design choices are infinite. And so I think that this scope is quite large in the time frame to begin with, that the sooner staff can point them towards more specific actually goals, it will shortcut their time in discovery to kind of tease that out with us, because they can design a system towards any end. Now, I think that when we evaluate the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, that will come out with some findings of like, here's some weaknesses we need to fix for, so we might not be able to fully assess. But I do wonder if we can articulate goals now, or perhaps build into the process a loop with council after these findings and the initial assessment happens, before they go into making recommendations. If that's the soonest we can get to goal statements, I understand we might need their help for that, but I think that we need something that's more crisp to point to, because the consultants will help us, but if we know where we want to go, we need to articulate that as soon as possible to make this more expeditious.
Yeah, I think that we can do that, Maggie. And I believe that when we do in consult with the contractor, our technical expert, when they look at strengths and weaknesses, I think that will also be an opportunity for us to just exhale, take a breath, and say, okay, now what are we really seeking to do? And then it'll be, I think it'll be an iterative process. And Rachel, you may want to jump in on this as well.
I agree with what you said, Deborah. Definitely an iterative process. And I can definitely get with Amber and Jessica in preparation for that May 9th agenda briefing discussion, where we will have more of a focus on facilities, but we can come back in response to your comment, Councilmember Ullman, with what might be doable in terms of having some of those more prescriptive goals as a part of the initial scope.
Thank you.
And in sake of time, we're having a couple that are having to jump off. I don't know how much more we have, but Amber,
okay. There's a few more slides. Would you like me to continue?
Just quickly, if everyone is able to stay with us, we'll go as quickly as possible.
I will be quick and just kind of just summarize. So the COA, that I'm referring to it as the COA, why is it needed? Well, as we indicated, route recovery has not been even and not linear. We need to reassess our service delivery to make sure we are deploying our existing resources wisely. And as we look at the budget resources and constraints, we're seeing the need for additional funding to provide just our base level services. This COA will help us analyze our ridership patterns, possibly create new route alignments or restructuring to shift from low ridership stops and areas, possibly provide more direct routes and service. You may see some recommendations for elimination of low ridership routes and maybe put more frequency on current routes with higher ridership and demand. We would also be looking at service delivery alternatives such as microtransit, and we also need to assess the vehicle, type of vehicle we're putting out for service delivery and ART service, and if what we're currently using is beneficial or if there's other mechanisms. Next slide. Some of the major components are existing services and assets inventory, our current budget and funding, public and stakeholder input. It will let people give us their feelings about the service and the changes we made in 2020. It'll take the pulse on that service increase implementation and coming out post-COVID if there's different demands for our community and the public and what the public priorities are. It'll give an existing services assessment, which will indicate and provide us an analysis of strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. And there's usually a snapshot of each route performance that provides these analysis. It will provide preliminary service scenarios and stakeholder reactions, which will likely provide insight into our customer satisfaction and service quality, and possibly pinpoint areas for improvement. And lastly, we'd like the final recommendations to be based on kind of that implementation or the footprint of the Transit Master Plan, which would include realistic budget scenarios and vehicle alternatives and methods to provide the service. Next slide. This is just a screenshot of an example that was based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, of their COA. It gives operating characteristics for a particular route. It gives you annual statistics and the ranking of that particular route based on other routes in the system. It gives the route analysis on the right page, which gives information such as strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. Most systems use these as an operations planning tool to identify their immediate and near-term improvements and making sure that we are deploying resources or need to adjust our sails in terms of service delivery by possible route reconstruction or ideas to maybe collaborate and do things differently. Next slide. So our next steps. Over the next several months, staff will draft a solicitation for the following key projects: the transit operations contract, the comprehensive operations analysis, and we didn't talk about ART place tasks, so we'll discuss that in May. And contracts for all these services associated with these particular work plan items will require City Council approval. Next steps. Or next slide, excuse me. It's been a long day. Key takeaways.
We can end here.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any final questions?
So thank you all. Rachel, I don't know if you want to kind of close us out and talk about next steps and even the purpose for this presentation.
Sure, I'm happy to wrap us up. The primary objective of today was to give council really a high-level overview of just the state of our transit operation, and building on what Council Member Turner said earlier, Jessica and Amber have done a really great job over the past several months, really getting a better pulse on where we are, also responding to our triennial review and getting the transit division fully staffed for at least the first time that I've been with the organization over the last 2 years. So a lot of really great work has happened. And so we will come back at the May 9th agenda briefing. I think we just had too dense of content to try to get through today to talk more specifically about the facility needs. But the main takeaway that we wanted to have from today is there has been a lot of conversation around the use of the $300,000 that was originally intended for a regional city-county master plan. And so that's why Amber and Jessica today went through more detailed the intent behind that comprehensive operational assessment. And so as Councilmember Ullman said, we can come back at the May 9th agenda briefing with more details on what the specific goals would be that we could include in that scope of work. And so I guess that's the key message, is just that the $300,000 we are recommending to include and use for an operational assessment, and not use that for route extension to either the S3 or the S6.
And Maggie, did you have your hand raised? Okay. Well, we took up way more of your time than normal, but we had a lot on this agenda, and I really appreciate you all's time. Hope you have a great rest of the day and weekend. Anything else? Other than that, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.